So, welcome to the Adventures in Learning podcast. I have a complete treat for you all today. Are you a friend of Dorothy? You are going to get a sneak peek at a brand new nonfiction picture book that I think is one of the most extraordinary things to come out this spring. I'm so excited to share it with you. And not only that, we have the author and the illustrator right here in the same Zoom room. I've got Kyle Lukhoff and Levi Hastings. And I'm so excited to talk to them, to get the story behind this book, to share it with you, and to learn a little about their adventures in learning. So, welcome. Hi, Kyle. Hi, Levi. Welcome for join. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. It's very nice to be here.
So, Are You a Friend of Dorothy is coming out this week. Can you tell us a little bit about this book and what prompted you to write it? Because it's unique among nonfiction picture books. You're not profiling a specific person or even a moment, you're profiling a phrase and what that phrase meant to so many people. So, can you give us a little background?
Sure. So it initially started as a profile of a specific moment. I got the idea when I was in the car with my husband and two of his friends, and we were driving to the beach. And one of them said, "Hey, did you all ever hear about the time that the military heard some sailors call themselves Friends of Dorothy and thought that there was a real woman named Dorothy that they went to look for?" And I said, "Yes, I have heard about this before." And I said, we were chatting about it, and the phrase "the hunt," oops, I just dropped a copy.
That's okay.
The phrase "the hunt for Dorothy" came up, and I said that would be a great title for a picture book. Someone should write a picture book about this. Wait a second, I should write a picture book about this. And it was originally just about that moment, and then my editor, when we sold it to Celia at Simon and Schuster, she encouraged me to expand it beyond just that moment into the bigger ideas behind that phrase and what I really wanted to communicate to readers beyond just that one funny story.
And do you want to share a little bit about what you're hoping readers will take from Are You a Friend of Dorothy?
Um, I've stopped hoping that readers take anything specific a long time ago because at this point I know that whatever someone takes from it says as much about what they bring to it as about what I put into it. I mostly just hope, at this point, I mostly just hope that people like my books, and also if they don't, that's okay.
Sounds fair. How about you, Levi? When did you come into Are You a Friend of Dorothy?
I was approached via my editor, the art director on this book, Laurent Lynn at Simon Schuster, who I'd worked with previously, and I, essentially I was approached as somebody who I've worked on some books regarding queer history in the past, and it's a subject that I've been very interested in professionally for a long time, and so it seemed like a perfect fit, particularly around this idea of sort of the lavender scare and sort of the queer coding that people have used for generations as a way of navigating a hostile world. And at the time, I was approached probably, I think it was maybe 2022. This, at the time, this book felt more like, oh, sort of a history lesson, and unfortunately, it's sort of becoming more relevant by the day. So I approached it as a fascinating piece of queer history that I think needed to be illuminated. And I really loved Kyle's approach, using the phrase as a sort of, and sort of this idea of a Dorothy character, sort of a spy master who was sort of, this target of investigation. I just thought it was such a clever approach to this whole idea, and I saw a lot of opportunities for some interesting visual narratives to be kind of, you know, um, you know, telling the story in a visual way, and sort of a very funny and humorous, a way of sort of the it's a very serious subject, and the way that at the time these were very serious issues, and people's very, very real lives were at stake. And but I think Kyle's approach of using this sort of it's just like it's a really fun. There's a very light touch to it, and it's a very approachable narrative, and so I just think that's a very interesting balance of there's a tension there of how do you tell these rather serious stories in a way that's very approachable to children. And I think Kyle did that beautifully. And so I wanted to sort of, there was a challenge there that I wanted to accept.
I really loved the way that the art and the words not only complement each other, but in many ways extend the story. It gives you other things that you are considering as you're reading it. And um, Kyle, you said something just a minute ago that resonated. I was thinking about just how relevant this story is today. You know, when you wrote it in 2021, is that about the time that you were writing it? It was more of a celebratory time, a time of hope, thinking that we were finally past some of the topics that were in the book. And we're clearly in a time where the dangers to the LGBTQIA community are much greater, probably, than they've been at any time since your story took place. What kind of went into your thought process as you were figuring out how do you make this relevant to kids?
Yeah, I mean, I will say that in 2021, I was not necessarily sharing that feeling of optimism and hope. That may have something to do with my personality. That may have something to do with the fact that I was a history major and I'm fairly familiar with cycles of progression and backlash, and I kind of knew not just what was coming, but what was already happening in terms of a growing anti-trans panic, specifically focusing on my books and also the existence of trans youth. So I knew that there was a chance that this book would come out into a world that made it feel even more relevant. I did not know quite how right I was going to be, though. Something that has been really fascinating to watch, especially over these last few weeks, is as like the concept of like diversity, equity, and inclusion is being attacked on the federal level, how people are now trying to get around it by saying what they mean using words that will not get them in trouble, which is extremely what this book is about. And then another interesting thing that's become more and more common over the last few years in terms of internet algorithm censorship is how people are coming up with ways of getting their message across online without coming afoul of censors, like the term like unalive instead of suicide, or using like a watermelon emoji instead of talking about Palestine. And I could not have predicted how relevant this book would feel. And when I wrote it, I wasn't sure if it was going to be interesting to kids or really anyone outside of myself. Really, at this point in my career, I have enough books out that I can just kind of do what I feel like. And if something doesn't sell, then I just move on to the next project. I wanted to write this book because it was something that I was interested in and curious about. And I figured if it got published, then I could find out if other people were interested in and curious about it too. And I don't know for sure that that will happen, but I am excited to find out.
Great. Levi, do you want to add anything to that?
Also,
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's a little disheartening how that is a more relevant topic. I mean, on the sense in the sense that like, you know, these issues turns out are evergreen in a way that I wish they were not. Um, yeah, I think I'm also curious to, you know, see kind of how this book is received um, today as rather than how it would be received 3 years ago. But I think, you know, the issue of coding is a very interesting one. You know, queer coding and, you know, political coding, you know, in the way that Kyle just mentioned. Um, we've always had to sort of navigate this in different ways, and we're kind of learning new ways to navigate. In you know, it's frustrating, obviously, but you know, there's something, I don't know, it speaks to sort of the resilience of these communities in the way that we always find ways to survive and thrive against these, you know, rather hostile forces. So yeah, I obviously I hope it finds an audience, and but yeah, I'm very curious to see what kind of response it gets.
Would you all like to share a couple of pages or a section from the book with the audience?
hmm. Well, my copy fell to the floor, so I got to pick it up. I don't know. Let's see if there's anything that I feel like reading aloud. Um, Levi, if you have something that you know of, you can go first.
Okay. Well, only because it feels very relevant to our current moment. The sort of in the opening pages where it talks about I don't know. Let's see
Oops,
if I
take
can.
yourself off of blur. There we go.
Yeah, I know. I need to let's see.
There you
Blur
go.
my background. There we go. Um, so in the first couple of pages, you see people will always know how to find each other. And when it isn't safe to be out as yourself, you can always create ways to learn who your friends might be. And I had a lot of fun, I don't creating this sort of like big family scene early on, sort of chosen family scene of, somebody being introduced to a large group of people sitting around a table, chatting, gossiping, and just kind of being together. After kind of being, because sorry, on the previous page, there's sort of this like people kind of using the code words and kind of tentatively asking like, "Are you a friend of Dorothy?" as a way of sort of, it's a way of kind of finding each other in a way that is sort of safe. Anyway, so that was something that I really wanted to include, sort of these images of found family and safety.
Agreed. And that sense of chosen family comes out very clearly in there. And I think, you know, picture books aren't just for children. I think they're for everybody. And I could 100% see this book going into the hands of teenagers, of young adults, of folks who are trying to figure out who they are and where they belong in the community. So I hope that it finds a really wide audience. And that notion of your found family is an important one, I think, in this book.
I was actually going to share the end of the book
Okay.
because I always know that I'm writing in the present, but the book will happen in the future. And I also try to be as honest as possible in my books about what might be true now and also what might be true for the person who's reading it, which could be anyone, anytime, anywhere. And I didn't want to say things were bad then, but they're better now. Don't worry. I wanted to say things were hard then in different ways, and they're hard today in different ways. And also, here are some things that are still true. So I just want to read the last couple sentences. LGBTQ people don't have to invent a secret language to talk about ourselves, but we still find ways of keeping each other safe. We still know how to find our community, and learning about the ways we survived in the past could help people in the future. There never was a Dorothy, but there will always be her friends.
I love that.
Yeah.
And that's just a beautiful way to end it. And the back matter is extensive and helpful as well. Clearly you put a lot of thought into what you included.
Yeah, the back matter is also something that I'm really proud of. One thing that's one very specific challenge I think that picture book authors have when writing about these topics is literally the words to use because nobody wants to read a picture book that has like a lengthy definition of what LGBTQIA plus means. And also, as adults, we know that the word gay or queer can be shorthand, but that understanding isn't necessarily common among every audience that you're going to be reading this book for. And so, in the back matter, I wrote a letter saying, you might have noticed that this book sometimes uses the words gay and lesbian, and sometimes uses the acronym LGBTQ. Sometimes it uses the word queer. You might have wondered what these words mean, what the differences are between them, and why people might use one instead of the other because I couldn't put that in the text itself, but I also didn't want that just to go unremarked. I'm really glad that I got the opportunity to write that bit because it's a really tricky thing when writing queer books for kids, especially because we all don't agree amongst ourselves what those words mean in the
Right.
place.
And you're trying to write a book that you don't know where the audience is. It could be a library in Idaho. It could be a classroom in Tallahassee, Florida.
Mhm.
Probably not, but it could be.
Or
Um,
it could be like a family with two moms and three dads who all live in the same house in Northampton. Like that's all.
exactly. And so you want it to be able to be relevant across the board for everybody.
Mhm.
I'd love to get to know you all just a little bit better for our listeners. And so I was wondering if you wouldn't mind taking a moment to just sort of share your adventures in learning with them. How did you get to where you are today? A little bit of background about how you got into writing or how you got into art, that kind of stuff.
Sure. So I started, I mean, I started my life as a baby and then I got older. But I think really the first place that you can set my beginning is when I got hired at Barnes& and Noble when I was 16. So I worked at a bookstore for a decade and I didn't know what I wanted to do as a grown up. And then I went to library school and then I was a librarian for another 8 years. So for 18 years, my whole life was just helping people, well, for almost like 20 years, because 2 of those years was library school. My entire life was helping people find books that they liked. And then in 2020, I quit my job to focus on writing full time because at that point, I had enough books out that could help me get school visits and also some advances coming in from other books that it became financially possible for me to not have a day job. But I think that for me, my writing story really began with at least the kind of writing that I do now. It began working at an elementary school, talking to kids every day about what they liked and didn't like, and also reading dozens of picture books to different audiences every day of the week.
Excellent. How about you, Levi?
So my background is in illustration, graphic design. I've worked professionally as a graphic designer for 20 years. And so I gradually was working as a freelance illustrator through much of that. And then I sort of came to picture books and publishing by way of comics. So I worked in sort of indie comics for all throughout my career. And I was working with there was a publication called the Nib, which is a nonfiction comics publication that was online exclusively for many years. It was, I think it recently closed, I think 2 years ago, but I was publishing these sort of short form nonfiction comics that were, around gay and queer history. And then I started getting picture book, contracts. So I did a few, I've basically sort of been doing that road. I wasn't specifically looking to do children's picture books, but they sort of found me, and so I've continued to. I hope I get more.
Excellent. And you've each done books that touch on history, particularly within the LGBTQIA community in terms of some of the leaders. Are there people that you've written about that you love, or are there people that you kind of go, I really think there needs to be a book about them that I want to write?
I got to write the picture book biography of Gavin Grimm. It's called If You're a Kid Like Gavin, and it came out in 2021, I think. And I'm still, that book didn't do great on its release, but I'm still very proud of it. I think it's an important story told very well. And I don't I have a like fairly maybe semi-controversial belief, which is that not everything needs to be made for children. I think that it is okay for kids to learn about some things when they are older. That being said, I have been playing around with the idea of writing a children's book about this man named Lou Sullivan, who was known for being the first person that we know of to really create international community of trans men. He also did a lot of work to advance the rights of trans men to be not just like traditionally masculine and heterosexual. He was really cool, but also I don't know if I want to tell children about him. I think that maybe kids can wait a little while to learn about him. I'm not sure. I'm still thinking about it.
Sounds like it's an interesting process, and I can't wait to see where you end up with that. How about you, Levi?
I've been some of my previous work. I just 2 years ago published a graphic novel about Baron von Steuben, who was a general in the American Revolutionary War, and was flamboyantly gay according to our current standards. And and that was a very interesting subject to tackle in that we were dealing with, me and the writer were, kind of co-producing the book at the same time, and wrestling with the idea of like, what does it mean to define queerness for somebody who is 200 years dead? How do we redefine these categories, and how do we reclaim somebody from history and what does that mean when we also have to deal with their like problematic nature, right? The ways in which that they were, the ways that we would now consider these people to be very complicated, and how do we reckon with that? And to Kyle's point, like some of these subjects are not necessarily, you can't really put into a children's picture book in a very tidy way, right? So these are subjects that are maybe a little bit more for an older audience, right? So this book was definitely much for more of a young, teen audience, teen to adult audience. But yeah, I think there's certainly a lot of queer figures that I think deserve to be, either reclaimed or reckoned with in a way that is a little more nuanced than you can necessarily put in a children's picture book.
Well, and I think that idea of nuanced is important because our identities are made up of so many things, and our queerness is part of that. Certainly, our cultural background is part of that, where we grew up, all of those things, and we're complex, complicated individuals. And it sounds to me, as you guys are working on your writing and you're illustrating, that you're really diving into sort of the nuances that make us human. And that seems like good storytelling to me.
Yeah, I think the problem is becoming that, or has been, right? Like it's difficult to tell or sell a nuanced story in a marketplace and in a culture that really sort of wants a less nuanced, like nuance doesn't really sell in a way that like a very sort of didactic or like very specific kind of, particularly with like, I don't know, Kyle, you probably had this issue too, where like sometimes it's sort of like you want like a hero, particularly when you're telling queer stories. It's like you either need somebody who's like up on a pedestal as like, oh, this is our heroic, like, idol. And it's much harder to tell somebody who's like, hey, this was a complicated person who did a lot for our community, but like may have had some, things, so it's hard to kind of tell that story in a sort of 36-page context.
Sure. What currently brings you all hope, or if not hope, at least some creative joy?
So I first started writing with the aim of publication because I felt bored and lonely a lot, and I didn't really know what else to do with my time. Writing has always been a way that I stave off my own existential dread, not necessarily even because I'm like looking forward to the future, but just because the act itself keeps me focused on something other than what I'm currently anxious about. Which I feel really lucky about. I know a lot of my fellow creatives are really struggling to write during these times, but for me, writing is the thing that helps me get out of bed in the morning. So I think that any like hope that I have goes into my books because that's where it will do the most good.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I'm focusing a lot on personal work at the moment, and kind of yeah, trying to kind of figure out a new or different path forward. I feel like some of the same, like every creative I know is also struggling, and sort of the traditional revenue streams are drying up, and I think we're all also trying to kind of figure out what does it mean to create in this environment. And I'm finding a lot of hope just kind of with my peer group, and we're kind of we're all sort of struggling together. But I do a lot of conventions, or I have done a lot of conventions. I'm trying to do more this year. Getting into a like more of a face-to-face physical reality, and having the sort of immediate feedback from an audience and people who like see your work or respond to your work, for me has been really rewarding after many years of sort of doing everything online and being so virtual. I think putting myself out there in a physical way and like being at a table and meeting people in real life has been much more gratifying than just trying to sort of get those responses from the internet, which are lovely, but like it feeds your soul in a different way.
Absolutely. Are You a Friend of Dorothy is out this week. You all need to pre-order it. Support Kyle and Levi and the beautiful work that they've put forth into the world. Share this book. I guarantee there's somebody in your life who needs to see and read this book and know that they aren't alone. And it's just such a fabulous nonfiction picture book. You really need to go out and get it. One last question for you all before we close the podcast. Are there any works that are coming out for you this year besides Are You a Friend of Dorothy or down the pipeline that you would like to let people know about?
Dorothy is the third book that I had come out this year, and it's only April, so I don't have anything else this year.
All right, well, tell us what the other two were that have come out this year
Oh,
already.
sure. So in February, my third novel came out. It's a Jewish fantasy adventure called A World Worth Saving. And then in March, I got to write my little golden book about pride.
Oh, wow. Well, definitely go look for those as well. How about you, Levi?
Dorothy is my only book currently coming out. I don't have any others in the pipeline at this point, but yeah, I'm pitching. I have some proposals out there, so hoping one of those lands somewhere good. Otherwise, I'm really focusing on professional work and making more inroads.
Excellent. And I will share both of your social media links in the show notes so that people can follow you. I strongly recommend that you do. And thank you so much for sharing this beautiful book with us.
Thank you, Diane.
Appreciate
Yeah,
it.